Star Trek Adventures. There are a few shows that can truly say they have stood the test of time. They need to have a special spark, something that transcends the early special effects, which cutting edge in their day do not hold up well in modern viewings. They need to have a relatable element, but more than anything, they have to be really well written. Doctor Who has it. For all their wobbly low-budget sets, the quality of the acting and scripts mixed with a cracking idea helps to keep the show relevant long after it was no longer on the air. Star Trek was another of these gems. For the networks they were both about money, but the fans saw something else in them. We have been playing Star Trek Adventures for about a year when my 10-year-old came and said he wanted to play. He plays D&D and has a very solid understanding of role-playing games, but Trek is unique, especially in RPGs, but we will get to that. I told him he must understand the setting. It's vital to Trek and can't be fudged. I thought that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. He went on Netflix and binge-watched the original series. For a modern child, so used to all the special effects advancements CGI brings to shows, he got hooked on something created in 1966. There is definitely something good in Star Trek. There have been a couple of attempts at doing a Star Trek RPG before. In all fairness, it is one of, if not the hardest game to make. The previous editions were done very well and were very well written, but I think they just didn't quite work. When I saw this one was coming, I was very skeptical. All the previous problems that exist in Star Trek RPGs haven't gone away, so how was this going to be any different? Well, I was very happy to find that it was different. Trek suffers from one terrible problem when it becomes an RPG. It's nice, and that can be crippling. It also has a social dynamic that is totally different from nearly any other RPG, and that can be totally catastrophic. So what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of RPGs can be played without any role-playing at all. The game can be high combat and almost a cut-down miniature wargame rather than an RPG. Add in some random encounters, big fights, and lots of meta. A lot of adventures used to say, if your players look bored, throw them a combat encounter. And for many players, those sorts of games are totally fine, and as long as everyone at the table is having fun, then it is cool. But Trek is not a combat game. The setting's basic ideals and philosophy are that combat is the absolute last resort, and a great many of the adventures that I have run for the game, and these include the published adventures, do not have any combat in them at all. They are puzzles, they are scientific exploration or scientific puzzles, they are social debates on difficult in-game issues, and they can be hard choices. The one thing they rarely are is combat focused. Now, like the TV series, combat does indeed happen, but it is not the focus of the game, and it does not happen anywhere near as often as nearly any other game. This in part makes Star Trek Adventures an RPG in its truest sense, as acting and story are very much a core of the game. Without it, the game does not work. That vital element of the game can be a problem. A lot of games today don't push role-playing like they used to, and some of the organised play out there is pretty formula-based. Problem needs solving, some travel and a fight, a puzzle or middle fight, and then a boss fight. If someone has learned that style of play, it can be hard for them to take on something like Trek. Star Trek Adventures works best when your players are imagining themselves in an episode of the show, when they can take enjoyment in doing the things that would be required of a Starfleet officer. That is not an easy thing to do. Your table needs to be made up of good role players, or at least people that want to be, and are willing to try and work at it. The game relies on conversation more than any game I have seen other than maybe Doctor Who. The game works best when the players talk, when they turn the mechanics into RP, and when they turn the results of skill checks into conversation. The upside of this is that when a table gets it right, then some of the best RP of any game will happen. There will be relationships that affect the game, and you will see real characters come to life. It's like a role-play community theatre. Do you have to be a good actor to play the game then? No, not at all, and that isn't the point I am trying to make. It doesn't matter how good or bad you are as long as you're trying your best, understanding that in this particular game RP is an essential mechanic and that you have to have fun doing it. It's when the game works. If that seems too hard or RP isn't what the players enjoy, then I would strongly suggest steering clear of Trek. The other possible issue is the social dynamic. Star Trek is very unique in that it is a game with a strong naval element. In that element is ranks, and unlike the vast majority of games out there, in Trek, you might well end up with players being various ranks and possibly one of the players being the captain. With that comes some players having a level of authority over the others. Now, some people will say that's a bad idea, but again we come back to one key point. That point is the players must want to play Star Trek. They must want to play the types of missions that they will go on. Be interested by the types of situations the show did. With that must come the desire to play characters within that setting. A player must be comfortable with being an ensign or a sector head or captain. Is it important to have the right people in the roles, however? Absolutely. People's fear of how this can go wrong are very justified if the wrong people are in the wrong role. What you need is mature players. They have to be able to understand the issues that come with a game that has ranks. Now, the GM can make the captain an NPC, and if no player is a viable candidate, then that is a solid course of action. But if there is a player who could be captain, then I think the game is better for it. The player as captain really has to get their enjoyment from being a mini version of the GM. They are a facilitator. They call meetings and really should get all the other players discussing the situation at hand, getting them to bounce ideas around. A good player as captain can get the other players to do more than they might have, encouraging them to expand on not only their ideas, but to work with the other players' suggestions to develop them. Captains also make decisions, but really their fun comes in making hard decisions, and I have seen players sweating between having to make a decision between two bad situations. Again, it's all about giving yourself to the setting. Now, the fears of having a player be captain usually comes from either the other players not wanting one of them being a higher rank, in which case they are going to have to sort that out among themselves, or the more serious one, which is a player who would be a bad captain. Now, a bad captain in these terms would be someone who thought their role was to be in charge, to order all the other players about, to make roles, and just run the ship their way. They would indeed be a terrible captain, and the game will fall apart faster than a Ferengi business deal. Star Trek Adventures is an amazing game. It pushes role-playing and story. It works in a deep and great setting, and players do not have to be the most knowledgeable on the setting to play, though it obviously helps if they know enough to get by. So that is really the elephant in the room, and now we can move on. The book is nice and thick and comes in at 368 pages. One thing that I really like is that there are no photos from the show, it's all art. Now, I do understand some people have felt the art goes from amazing to meh, but overall I think it's a great book. I think the art is fine and it's held up very well to use. We did our first season, and the core book got used a lot over the year, and has shown very little wear and no deterioration in areas like the spine or pages coming loose. Now, the Complex Games Apologist has done a series of vids on the rules in detail. I will link to the first one of his vids in the description. While I don't agree with all his positions on the rules, I do however understand how he came to each of his points, and I can totally respect that. The 2D20 system is overall a simple and streamlined system, but I do feel that it does the job for which it was intended. If a player likes high crunch combat rules like Pathfinder and to a lesser degree D&D, then Trek's 2D20 may not be to their liking. There are not a huge list of skills, attributes or specialties in the way that other games do. The rolls are quick and the outcomes are just as quick to determine. With a game that relies on RP as much as it does, the fast resolution is a much needed thing. A key element of the rules is momentum for the players, which allows them to do some cool things, and the GM gets threat, which allows them to do some cool things. After more than a year of playing, I am not sold on the threat mechanic yet. One person posted that threat is a mechanic for GMs to do what they have always done in every other game that didn't have the threat mechanic, which I can kind of agree with. I haven't seen how it really adds to the game in a unique way. Now, momentum I think is a cool thing for the players to have though. Combat rules are overall fast and can be deadly. It's a nice deterrent to players who want to whip out their phasers all the time. Klingon disruptors have no stun setting and they do no damage. They just kill. There are a couple of rules to give players a chance at life, but they are not an endless pool, so combat does tend to be over pretty quick even if phasers are set to stun. I like it. It works for this game and it can lead to some very dramatic incidents, as enemies and allies may quickly fall. There are rules for assisting each other. This mechanic is encouraged by both rules and roleplay, and the rules for it are easy and effective, and having the RP mixed in with it helps to draw the players into conversations. The only area of the rules which feels a little clunky is ship combat, and honestly, nearly every game struggles with how to do ships or vehicles. Character creation is a life path system. The players can roll randomly or choose at each stage of their character's lives up to the point the game starts. Each new choice adds something to the character. When it's done, the players will have a very good idea of who their character is and where they have come from. The advancement in Star Trek is nearly non-existent. This is a level-less system. The advancement is next to none because the characters are not inept. They are fully trained and capable Starfleet personnel. Star Trek Adventures is about the story, the characters, and its players for the sake of playing the game. The enjoyment is in the game, not in the next level. While this might not work for every RPG, it is a great way to do a character and it works very well for Trek. The characters can be ensigns all the way up to captain, but it really does depend on how the players work together. But I have run a table of 7 with 1 captain, 3 ensigns and 3 department chiefs, and it played out excellent. The captain realised he had to make some important decisions but not dictate. The department heads realised they needed to find the solutions to the problems and work together to that end, as well as delegating actual tasks to the ensigns to get things done. It worked like an episode of Trek. There are several races a player can choose from at character creation: Andorian, Bajoran, Betazoid, Denobulan, Human, Tellarite, Trill, and Vulcan. More races have been added in follow-on books. Another area of this game that differs a little to other games is in its NPCs. Now, NPCs are in every RPG and there is no reason that they can't be fully fleshed out and deep. We've all seen those, and some GMs and adventures are great at it. But if we are honest, then we have also seen games where they are flat and one-dimensional. Star Trek relies on NPCs a lot. They are not just the bearers of exposition, they are part of the crew. There are rules for creating NPCs within the adventure, and section heads are encouraged to make some personnel. These NPCs become recurring guest stars, so it's very important that they get made into something more than just a silent figure holding a clipboard. Like the races, there are a decent amount of ships included, with more added in follow-on books. While there are not tons of ships, the fact that they are somewhat modular, and that one of the things the players can do is build their ship, is a lot of fun. It was great to watch them having to make decisions on what they wanted the ship to be, what abilities and amenities it will have. The department heads working together to try to find the best way to get the things they required. It also gave the players a sense of ownership over the vessel, so I highly recommend letting the players be involved in the ship's construction. There is base information on some of the villain races in the core. There is enough to get a GM started, and the sections are interesting, but they are not very big. These sections are a lot more fleshed out in some of the sector guidebooks that have been released. The GM section could have been a little larger, mainly because the GM in Trek has to really work. It's very satisfying, but it is also mentally draining because of the workload, especially in the acting department. Because of this, I would have liked to have seen more on how to bring all the elements together. GMing Trek has moments that are very different to other games, and for newer GMs, a little extra help in this section would be useful. Having said that, what is there is certainly good. In conclusion, you do not have to be a die-hard fan to enjoy this RPG. Some knowledge of the setting is essential, as is a willingness to truly work as a team. It is very unusual in the sense that players are expected to be a pacifist in nature and violence the last resort. The ideals of the show is what the players are expected to follow, and playing in that setting is the reason they should want to be there. So if you like Trek, like the idea of being part of a ship's crew exploring strange new worlds, where the game and RP are the primary reason to play, then Star Trek Adventures would be well worth your time and money.